It's like tabletop Fortnite. At least that's how it was described to me at Gen Con by a very excited booth worker. Hey everyone, it's Night Haro here, and today I have a review of Zone Wars, set in the Mutant Year Zero universe by Free League Publishing. So if Mutant Year Zero sounds familiar to you guys, it's an IP that's been around for a while. Free League has released a tabletop role-playing game set in this universe with its own style and flavor of mechanics. And today, though, what we're going to be reviewing is this. This is Zone Wars, which is a skirmish tactical war game. Okay, now with that, let me go ahead and just give you kind of an overview of how the game is played. And then once I've done that, we'll talk about some of the pros, and then we'll talk about the cons at the end. I do have some serious bones to pick with this rulebook over here, but we're going to save that for the end. And I mean that in a loving way. Hopefully it's good feedback for the folks over at Free League. I love most of their products are very much up my alley, so I love what they do. Okay, so for gameplay here. So again, this is going to be a 2-player version. You can buy the expansion and go up to 4 players. Everyone picks a faction. Here on this side, we have the mutant humanoids, and then on this side, we have anthropomorphized animals. And again, the whole idea is that everything's mutated, and so that's the theme throughout. With the expansion, it adds 2 more factions. One is a psionic faction, so using mental abilities, and then the 4th faction is actually a sentient AI. And then over here, you can see that there are mutations there's 2 different stacks. These are special abilities. Each character that you have, there is actually 5 with each faction. I only have 3 of the cards laid out for each one here, just for room on the table, but you can see all 5 of the miniatures out here. Each one will have 1 special ability that you get that is specific to that character, and then you get one that's randomized from their particular deck. So you'll have a particular feel with the humanoids, you'll have a particular feel with the anthropomorphized animals, and so on and so forth. And that randomness really helps with the replayability. So to just give you kind of a specific example here, over here we have Dux, and Dux has Warning Call. The Warning Call is something that always comes with Dux. He always has that. And what he can do is he can see, if he sees somebody about to attack one of his allies on the battlefield, he can issue a Warning Call. You'll spend a token, one of these mutant tokens, and he can reduce the damage taken by his ally by 1 for each token that he spends. And then the second ability here is a random ability. Now you'll see that there are 3 different kinds of symbols on these various cards. The first one here is going to be the shield symbol. This is typically used for defense, similar to the Warning Call here. And basically what that is an interrupt ability. You can use this at any time. Then you also have the arrow. The arrow abilities are actions. So if there's an arrow on a card, it means that you're actively doing that thing. And then the plus is something you can tackle into an action that you're already doing. So your antlers improve your charge attack or your damage or what have you. Just as for example, I actually don't recall what that one does. And then what you also have are items or artifacts. So here we have clubs, we have, a scrap pistol and what have you. You can get things like gaffer tape, which is really good. You can get like a lamp, which is, an artifact from the ancient age, which Mutant Year Zero set in the post-apocalyptic future. And so those things are worth victory points. Typically how you win in Zone Wars is by victory points. And you can get those by damaging your opponents. You can get them by collecting these various artifact items that are in this deck here. Some of them are worth more points than others. Some of them just allow you to get additional attack and defense and what have you. And that is largely the name of the game, is to collect as many points as you can in most playstyles. Now, there are various scenarios that you can run where you are just trying to collect artifacts. There are some where you're really just trying to damage your opponents. So collecting artifacts is really just another way of damaging your opponents. But typically speaking, you're not just trying to kill the other side. And 2, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned a little bit more. These particular special abilities do various things. So the frog legs here will help you move around the battlefield more quickly. This crusher here will help you do more damage. So essentially reduce damage, cause damage, help you move around the battlefield more, and so on and so forth is generally what your special abilities allow you to do. Another really interesting thing about the turn order in Zone Wars is that each faction takes one of these tokens for each character that they have currently active. You put that in some sort of opaque container, and then you draw one out at random, and that determines who goes next. So let's say I pull out an Arc Mutant token, and obviously they wouldn't all be here, but I pull one out. I get to choose who I'm activating on my side, and so that is randomized. I could go 2 or 3 times in a row, then my opponent could go, and so on and so forth. So it very much randomizes who gets to go. Along with that, being able to randomize, having this second card on everybody, it really adds a bit of randomness to the table. And overall, that can be really nice for new players and for those that aren't serious hardcore tactics fan, to provide a little bit of randomness in the game, so that someone who is just an expert can't guarantee a win every single time, because there is that random aspect to it. Similarly, when you're playing 3 or 4 players, you can kind of gang up on the person who's a little bit more experienced and a little bit more skilled. Now for turn order, once you've pulled out, a token and you've chosen to activate one of your characters, you can move, and then you also have an action that you can do. That action could be attacking, could be doing something else, picking up an artifact, or you could also double move. And so that's, generally very familiar to those of you who are familiar with like Dungeons and Dragons and how, in RPGs, kind of that tabletop aspect, you can really see it coming in here where you have a movement and then you have an action you can do on any given turn. Another really cool aspect is they have provided everything you need is in the box, and I really love that. They provide you with a ruler, which not all tabletop skirmish and war games do. So that's really helpful for determining your movement and what have you. Everything you need is in here. Those hardcore war gamers, if you've seen people pulling out various kinds of tape measures to measure different things on the board, having just a set piece of cardboard with the correct distances marked on it it's amazing. It's invaluable. I know it seems like a low bar, but it's really nice you have it so you can determine how long you can move here depending on your character, your abilities, and what have you. You can also draw a zone token whenever you're determining the turn order, and these are essentially random encounters. Now, these are typically, I want to say almost always bad. However, it's not always bad for you. So these affect the person who went last, and they actually roll a survival roll. So this is part of the theming and thematics of this game. You are in the zone in the Mutant Zero universe, and so in this area, all kinds of bad things can happen, right? You could have acid rain that could cause damage to everybody on the board. You could have, for example, a Razorback appear, and you have a monster that now is going to attack you or your allies or somebody else or what have you. And so what happens with these is you pull these cards out. This is actually a land shark, so not the Razorback, but this would be a monster. The land shark here will attack somebody, and what happens is you roll against your survival skill, and if you're successful, you can choose to have the land shark in this case, or perhaps a Razorback or something else, attack your opponent, and you're able to choose who that's going to attack and who it's going to affect. And if you lose, it affects you, okay? And whoever went last is who these cards always affect and who's rolling their survival roll. And what you'll see here is these various abilities, your ranged attack, your melee, and then your survival skill. That's what you'll be rolling at. Some particular characters are better at survival than others. So typically, if you have a really big guy like this warthog looking guy here, he's probably going to have a very high attack, maybe has a decent defense, maybe has a decent survival, but he's not going to have both. So one of those skills is going to be low. So if this gets pulled on him, it's probably not going to go well. Now, if you have another character that does have a particularly high survival, then you get to play this card on somebody else, and this can totally wreck your opponent. So pretty interesting gameplay there. As I kind of mentioned earlier, these artifacts are what give you points. And typically what you're trying to do is win by having enough victory points. And you can pick up the artifacts and then run to the edge of the board, and you can actually remove that character from the board. And once all of one side's characters are removed from the board, the game is over. There are also mechanics and different, types of play where there's a kind of a turn timer. After so many turns, everything ends. And if you didn't get your artifacts off the board out of the zone to safety, then you can't score points with that. You also get a point for damaging your opponent, taking all of their health away. When all of your health is gone the first time, you don't actually die. You become bloodied. And essentially, your opponent gets a victory point for having bloodied you. So that is one way you can score victory points. But actually, you get to come up the next round. You could potentially lose a turn. But generally speaking, you don't lose more than one turn, and you might not even lose that. And you come back up with your full health. Now, if you lose all of your health again, you do die. However, your opponent does not get a victory point for that. So what happens is you're not really incentivized to kill off your opponents in most playstyles, although you could change the rules, and that could be an objective for that particular scenario. But generally speaking, you're not just trying to kill your opponent. You're trying to achieve objectives on the board, and there's a lot of room for customization, some home brewing, come up with your own scenarios and stuff like that. For those who are maybe a little more advanced or want to try something different, there's absolutely a scenario here where you could draw a circle and say, hey, it's a zone control, all right? And whoever has the most, characters in this particular area gets 3 victory points at the end of a given round. And, whoever controls the most, or if you want to put several zones of control, you can absolutely do that with Zone Wars and homebrew it, and it's going to work incredibly well and very easy to do. So the core resolution mechanic in Mutant Year Zero is going to be with a dice here. And basically what you have is that your character here, and you can see it kind of matches the color. I think this is yellow or green. And these various things correspond to the number of dice you're going to roll. So for example, let's say I was attacking with Moose over here. He has a melee. I'm going to be say I'm melee attacking, he has a melee of 4. So that means that I would roll 4 of these dice. And then he also has a weapon here. He has a club. And the weapons give you black dice. So I'd roll 2 of these. Now, whenever you roll dice, the numbers that you roll do nothing. Okay, so think any number that you roll doesn't really help you or doesn't really do anything. If you get the biohazard symbol, that is a mutation. What happens with that is you can always choose, if you roll a biohazard symbol, you can choose to re-roll any of the numbered faces that came up. So I could re-roll this 2 and a 5 if I rolled them, for example. And then I add up all of the biohazard symbols that I got, and those are mutation tokens that I then take. So this allows you to use these various mutations, not all of them, but most of them require you to expend at least, maybe they all do, to expend at least 1 mutation token, and then you can spend several. So for example, with this Crusher ability, for each mutation token I spend up to 3, I can do an extra point of damage with that particular ability. So that's how these guys work. Now, if you do decide to push a roll and you came up with a 1 on any of your black tokens, this actually can damage your weapon. So it will reduce the number of dice you can roll in future attempts. And then here with the nuclear symbol, this is actually damage. So this would be 2 points of damage here on a given attack. And then of course your opponent has a chance to roll for defense. Typically, like over here with Danko, for example, he has a diving helmet that allows him armor 2. So he would roll 2 dice. Again, getting this nuclear symbol would reduce the damage by 1, and you can also have various special abilities and what have you. If you were in cover, there's rules for being able to roll extra dice, being in cover depending on how covered you are, and so on and so forth. If you're totally out of line of sight, no one can just attack you, so there's also that aspect of it as well. And those are essentially the core mechanics that you have to work with here. All right, now that you have a pretty good idea of how the game is played, let's go ahead and talk about some of the pros of the game, what I think it does really well, and then we'll move on and talk about some of the cons, things I don't think it does as well. I will say, if you're interested in getting into tabletop skirmish games or perhaps getting into wargaming, I think what everybody always thinks about is Warhammer, and Warhammer is incredibly expensive. It can cost you very easily like $1,000 getting into it in the first year, and that's why I personally have never got into it. But I am very much interested in these war games or skirmish games in a box. Some of them, like what I have behind me, we're going to be doing that in a series and just kind of talking about all of them. I will say that even though I haven't done all the reviews for all of them, I have played all of them and have, the reviews are prepared. I just need to record them. And I would say that, unfortunately, I think it's complicated. I think it depends what you're into. So that's why we're going through the pros and cons today to determine if this is for you. So let's just go ahead and start off here. I would say, yes, this is a great thing. If you're interested in getting into tabletop skirmishing, I think this would be an excellent place to start. If you're someone who's a hardcore war gamer and you're trying to get your friends into skirmish tabletop games, getting used to measuring things and as opposed to counting spaces and what have you, I think that Zone Wars does a great job and is a good entry point. There's also a decent amount of randomness here with randomizing the abilities you get. Obviously the dice, that's kind of typical for this genre a bit though, but also randomizing the zone cards and who that goes on and how that works and what have you. It really presents enough randomness that it's not purely like my skill is better than your skill. And so if you're the person who's really experienced, you just constantly crushing your allies or your friends rather. So, you might want something like that. And I think Zone Wars provides that. Also, if you play 4 players and you're the hardcore war gamer, maybe all your friends team up against you. And that can provide a more balanced play than a lot of other skirmish games that I have had experience with. So I think in that aspect, it's really good. I would also say the 4-player version, at least if Gen Con is anything to base it on, a lot of people absolutely loved playing this and had a lot of fun. Someone even told me they had fun while they're losing, which can be a very important thing, right? It's not just about crushing your enemies, it's just about having fun, just like any other board game. I would also say there are some unique mechanics in this game, and when I say that, all mechanics have probably been used somewhere at some point, but there's a very unique composition. I really like the survival mechanic and that you're rolling and you can apply that to an opponent if you succeed, or it happens to you if you fail. I think that's very interesting. Let me know if there's some place that I've missed that mechanic exists somewhere else, but as far as I know, this is the only place something like that exists. There's very high replayability with this game. The fact that you can have customizable characters is amazing. So for those of you who come from the TTRPG PC like me, you can actually make your own character and choose how much range, melee, and survival, and even health they have. Now, it's very simple. It's very straightforward. My only complaint about that is that they don't give you any blank cards, but the game at $70 USD is a pretty good steal, a really good value. Everything on the board, it looks amazing. I hope that comes across in the camera. These cards are incredibly high quality. These miniatures are much higher quality than, they're not the highest quality perhaps, but they're much higher than you would expect for most board games, and they look really good. Actually, I'll link a video here. I'll pop one up of another YouTuber who painted ducks over here. And I mean, part of it's his paint, a large part of it's his painting skill, but it's, the miniature, the model is good enough that he took the time to paint it, and it looks absolutely amazing. Blew me away. It's terrific. So you get really high quality models. You get high quality cards. These are plasticized, so if you get a little bit of water on them, it's not just going to ruin it. Again, the terrain, all of the terrain is double-sided. So for example, if you wanted to, left and right-handed, so whenever you're placing the various terrain, you can always swap it around, including the measuring stick. It's amazing. I wish they would include maybe a couple more of these, but it's really nice. It's really nice to have it. That's not a real, I'm being pedantic if I'm complaining about that. And then of course the form factor in the box and the mat, it looks amazing, right? It looks really good. The artwork is really nice. And this is what I've come to expect from Free League. As I mentioned before, there are various scenarios you can play. You can, try to collect all the artifacts. There can be some let's just kill the other side. You could easily introduce your own homebrewed mechanics where there was zone control and what have you. This is also a very low barrier to entry. So a game 2v2, about 45 minutes, and testing it out, that's what I found. Now there is a caveat to that. I did find the rulebook took me much longer to read and understand than it did to actually just play the game. So that is a caveat. We'll talk about that more in the cons section. But when I say, the actual play time, this is not like, hey, we put this out and it's going to take us 2 to 4 hours to finish a game. No, you can play a game easily your first time within an hour, generally speaking. And again, there's turn timers on everything. So even though you're moving slower at first, you can just set a lower turn timer, which is what they suggest. There is also a quality co-op version or way of playing. My only complaint again is with the rules. It's absolutely buried in the solo play section, but there is a co-op section, very easy to do, very easy to learn how to play. You can learn with a friend, so maybe you're the experienced person, play co-op with them. You're kind of playing the enemy, but in a nice way. And you can introduce randomness if you want, but you can kind of teach your friend to play. I think that's great. I wish they would have kind of led with that for those who are new to the space. Other things, the space this takes up compared to most war games. Now, this mat is a little bit over 3 feet, if I'm recalling correctly. I do not have it squared out here. I've actually had part of it hanging off the table in the front. But generally speaking, for wargaming, this is a very small play space. If you only want to use part of the map, that's what I did in one of my playthroughs. And then other ones, we use the full square map. You absolutely can. I think that it was designed to be played. The 2 and 4 player versions were designed together, so they mesh together and they go really well. But you want probably the larger map for a 4-player game, but for a 2-player game, you can shrink down the board a bit. And I say that because a lot of you hardcore war gamers are like, "What are you talking about? I've got giant tables for Warhammer and what have you." The average board gamer, I don't think does. I know I don't. Most of my friends don't. We have rectangular tables. I even custom built like a coffee table so that my wife and I could play board games on it, and I still made it rectangular, and it still doesn't fit this map because I didn't make it big enough. Again, if you're a war gamer, you're like, yeah, I already have all these things. If you're just the average, tabletop board game player and what have you, you probably don't. So keep that in mind. And then kind of the last thing here on the low barrier to entry, again, you get everything you need in a box. It's a game in a box for $70, and it's a great price for what you get, at least in my humble opinion. And that's really nice. Being able to just, hey, here's everything. Most war games, you guys know how it is. If you've ever looked into this stuff, it's like, oh, you need this and you need this. You got to buy that book and this book and what have you. This is all in a box. And really what I want to focus on with this kind of series of talking about, skirmish games in a box, I really want things to be self-contained, right? So for $70, everything you need. You don't need to question anything. You don't need to paint anything if you don't want to, what have you. It's all here. You can play, decide if you like it. If you do, then hopefully you can get in more, get the 4-player version, and so on and so forth. Again, we kind of already talked about it a decent amount, but the curb appeal in this game is amazing. I hope it comes through on the camera. These miniatures look great. These cards look amazing. The artwork, very good. You know, might not be your personal style, but I think we can all agree it looks pretty good. And so I think in that aspect, the a little bit of plasticize. So if you get a little bit of water on all of these things, it's not going to ruin it. I wouldn't pour a whole cup of water on it, but it's going to be fairly durable for you. And again, that's what I come to expect from Free League. They make incredibly high quality products. All right, all of the pros out of the way. Let's go ahead and talk about a few of the cons. So as I mentioned, this is both a pro and a con, okay? This is much smaller, less space required than most war games. However, it's still a lot of space, and it's square. The map is square. Again, I think it was designed for 4 players, where you really want that larger map. On a 2-player version, you don't need that much space, but most people don't have a 3-foot by 3-foot table to play on. Most of us have normal rectangular tables in most situations. And so the space requirements for this are still a bit high, and something you might have to worry about depending on your particular play situation. If you have a normal board game setup, you might find that you still don't have room to play this 4 players at your standard table setup. Another issue that I found is that, when you're talking about board games in particular, as far as I can recall, this is the first board game that Free League has made. Everything else has been even though it's played on a tabletop, they're TTRPGs, they're tabletop role-playing games, and this is the first really board game. And I feel like they made some kind of some mistakes that I would expect someone who'd done a lot of this not to make. So, for example, these tokens. You get 10 of these tokens, which are the artifact tokens, and you're required to use all of these in the first scenario. But there are only 10 of these. So if you lose one, you're going to have to use something else. So I wish they would have put some extra pieces in the box there. I know that would be more expensive. It's already a very good value and what have you, but I just wish they would have put more. Same with the zone tokens. You only get 2. You use both of them. So if you use one of these, you're gonna have to come up with some other token, put a coin in there or something like that. I know that might seem pedantic, but to those of us who have a lot of board games, we know that this can be a problem. This can be an issue. Another issue I have is the dice could be a little bit more descriptive. At least this was one complaint that some of my players gave to me whenever we were playing, is that, hey, the numbers, this is a little bit arbitrary about what these do. Okay, there's the mutant token, that makes sense, but the nuclear token being a hit, also what is this symbol? This is how you take damage on your weapon, and then also the numbers being a miss. If you already took the time to make custom dice, why not make the numbers clearly show a miss? That's not going to be a big deal long term, but when you're first starting out, I think that was some of the complaints I got for people playing this the first time. Okay, now let's move on to my absolute biggest problem, and I think it's actually pretty huge. It took me longer to read the rule book than it did to play the game the first time, and by far. And so what I would strongly recommend, if you're looking to get into this game, find a friend, find somebody else, or look up a video. I'll actually link a couple down below that are here on YouTube that explain to you the rules and the mechanics of how to play. Reading this rule book, I just want to say to whoever wrote this rule book, my issue is not with the writing. The writing clearly explains in words very complex things that have to happen on the board, and in that aspect, they achieve their goal, right? Like a very good technical writer feels like wrote this book. My issue is, and anybody who plays a lot of board games knows this, is the problem is that's not how you should write a rule book for a board game. It's not a best practice. 90 to 95% of this book is simply walls of text. There are almost no pictures in this book whatsoever, and that should actually be the opposite case. And even in the very front, when they do kind of explain what some of these various things do, they don't clearly explain what the facing on the dice do. You actually have to read in the rule book to find that. It should be clearly listed. And even though they do tell you what some of these various tokens and stuff do, it's not nearly enough. This is the opposite of what you want in a board game rulebook. You want at least 50% symbols. It also does not start off with a clear example of a gameplay or of how to play. There should almost always be in really well written, well designed board game rulebooks. Give me an example. Explain the game to me first off is always the best way to learn. There are other ways you could do it, but regardless of how you do it, what's in the rulebook is not it. We very much dive into the details of what is going on before I even have an understanding of the broader aspects of how to play the game, and that makes it incredibly hard to learn. As I mentioned, the co-op version is in the very back, and it's actually buried under solo play. So solo play is where you find the co-op version, which is not where I would expect it, and it's buried. It doesn't even have a heading on it. It just mentions it in like the first sentence or two of solo play. And so if you're looking for a co-op version of this game and to understand how to do it co-op, you're not going to find it in this rule book. I could go on and on. I would just say that, writing a rule book for a board game is an art unto itself. I have a huge stack, and I played a lot of board games, something I really love to do. And I've read many a rule book. And I will say that writing a good rule book is, again, it's an art unto itself. It's very much its own thing. But what we have here is not it. And I know the folks over at Free League, and every single one of them that I have ever met is a huge nerd. And I know has played plenty of board games. I think they need to find a board game that they really like and they feel like the rules are well designed. Take some tips from that, and I wish they would incorporate them. And it's something, unfortunately, that we've seen in a handful of Free League products where the rules themselves, even though the entire product is amazing, oftentimes it is the rules and the way it's presented, the formatting and what have you, that is lacking in a lot of their products. I hope it's something that they work on in the future and help to improve. All right, that out of the way, kind of in conclusion, would I recommend Zone Wars to a friend? I would say absolutely yes. I would recommend this. I'd recommend it primarily to folks that are just looking to get into the tabletop skirmish game and maybe haven't done anything else before. I would also recommend it to hardcore wargaming friends who need we're always looking for that gateway game to be able to get our friends into playing more of the kinds of games that we enjoy. So hopefully they enjoy it as well. I think this is a great entry point. Having the co-op version, you could play with someone, help them explain the rules, and it not feel so adversarial. If that's the situation you're in, can be really good. I highly recommend that. I like it very much. The only thing I would say is like, hey, this rule book, don't read the rule book. If it's my friend, I'm going to say, hey, hit me up. I'd love to play a game with you. We can go through the rules and what have you. Or I would send them a YouTube video or two. Again, I'll link a couple down below. But I would discourage them because I think reading the rule book can create a bad experience, put a bad taste in your mouth. And worst of all, it's not going to give you all the information you need to actually play the game. But at the end of the day, I think this is an excellent tabletop skirmish game. Again, the curb appeal, the quality of the miniatures, if you're someone who likes to paint, it's excellent. I highly recommend it. And it's just fun, right? That's the core thing you want at the end of the game. This is a fun game to play with your friends. The randomness is very enjoyable, a lot of customization, and you're going to get a lot of replayability. And if you're interested in other products by Free League, I have done a review of Dragonbane and several other, and I've even done some guides and stuff, and I'll actually link that here. But anyways, I think that's it for today. Appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.